Hello and good evening. Welcome to tonight's presentation. My name is Rakia Nance, and on behalf of the Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's presentation on the Anne Arundel County Clean Water Program, also called Our Water. I do want to note that tonight's presentation is being recorded, and further on in the presentation, we'll explain how you can access the meeting recording and also presentation slides. A few minutes after 6 o'clock, so I will go ahead and begin with tonight's presentation. Here are the few of the people that you'll be hearing from tonight. From the Department of Public Works, we have George Heiner, Lynn Berry, and Ron Briggerman. From HDR, in addition to myself, we also have Ed Shea and Jessica Sneed. Tonight's meeting is being hosted on Zoom, and here are some of the functions and tools that you can use. We're going to ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking, and to ensure optimal bandwidth, please turn your camera off. If you have a question, feel free to enter it into the chat box, and we will address them in the order in which they are received. You can also use the raise hand function if you would like to verbally speak your question. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to talk about the septic to sewer conversion program, and more specifically, changes to the existing petition process. There has been interest from the community, which has brought us to tonight's presentation. I do want to note that this meeting is non-binding. We're not asking you to vote or make any kind of decision tonight. Instead, this meeting is designed to help you learn more about the program and make an informed decision on whether connecting to public sewer is right for your community. Please note that it is a community decision whether to connect to public sewer, and later on in the presentation, we'll explain a little bit more how that process works. Please keep in mind that what we're discussing is purely conceptual. There is no confirmed or decided upon project that is in the works. Everything that we are discussing is purely conceptual. Here's an overview of the information we'll be discussing tonight. First, we'll talk a little bit about water as it relates to Poplar Point. Then we'll discuss funding and costs, followed by application and petition process. And then we'll talk about next steps and open up for extended Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to George Heiner with the Department of Public Works. George?
Okay, thanks, Rakia. So I'm going to talk at a couple different spots tonight, but the first part I'm going to talk about is what is the Our Water program, and you know, kind of what are the goals? Why is the county interested in septic system connections? And I guess I just want to reinforce what Rakia was mentioning is that there's no planned project, and you know, this isn't any kind of binding meeting. We're just providing information about the sewer petition process and how it's been changed to try to make it a little more affordable for people to connect to public sewer. Can you go to the next slide? So the Our Water program is really an overall initiative. It's designed to ensure the health of our waterways in the future and maintain our nutrient load goals. There's 5 main elements to the program. There's small system upgrades, where we're going to look at taking over small wastewater treatment plants and upgrading them to more kind of state-of-the-art treatment technologies. We have our stormwater improvements program, which is funded through the stormwater fee, and there's a lot of ongoing projects that have been going on over several years now. There's going to be a groundwater resiliency component to the program. And on wastewater treatment enhancements, the county has invested a lot in its wastewater treatment plants, and they're getting exceptional performance now. So we're going to look to continue that performance going forward. And the last piece, which we're really talking about tonight, is the septic to sewer connection program. So, and that's basically, we're going to be talking about changes to the sewer petition process that have been made to try to make connections more affordable. Can you go to the next slide? So why are we interested in connecting septic systems? So the main reason is related to in the context of nutrient removal and nitrogen specifically. So our wastewater treatment plants, as I mentioned, they've been all upgraded over the last 10 years, and we're getting really high efficiency, high nitrogen removal from those facilities. When we connect a septic system, a traditional septic system, when we're able to connect that to a public system, we can lower the pollutant loads by about 90%. Can you go to the next slide? So overall, Anne Arundel County has 40,000 septic systems and 13,000 in the critical area. That's a quarter of the entire total in the state. And septic systems are a significant source of nitrogen for the county waterways, and they do have impacts on local rivers as well. So there's an interest, there's a need there to see if we can get more septic systems to be connected. Can you go to the next slide? And when we see when the benefit there is, and there's a lot of information on this slide, but if you look on the right-hand side of it, is the estimated nitrogen load per household from a conventional septic system is the large blue bar, dark blue bar, is about 18.6 pounds per household. If you have a BAT system, that nitrogen load is about half of that, so around 9 pounds per house per year. A treatment plant that performs at our permit level, which is the required level, is producing about 3 pounds per household. But our treatment plants are actually discharging right now around half of their permitted load. So you can see when we make a connection from when a septic system connects to the public sewer, there can be a pretty significant load reduction from that location. So there are some benefits overall, kind of to the broader public in septic connections, and that's less total nitrogen discharge to the bay. It helps us maintain compliance with our state nutrient load goals and the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, total maximum daily load. There's also fewer nutrients that would be discharged into the local waterways. So all the county waterways are listed as impaired for nutrients and other improvements. So, kind of in addition to the general benefit towards the Chesapeake Bay, there's more direct benefits locally. Can you go to the next slide? And there are some benefits for the homeowner. These are very site specific and may not apply to everyone's situation. But we're going to mention some of them because these are some potential benefits we're aware of. So in some cases, your septic system can be a constriction on what you can do in terms of building additions at your property. Those typically can be alleviated if you do a public sewer connection. Your yard nearly always has to have room for a drain field, the existing drain field, and then often a future drain field. And so if you switch to a public sewer, that space is available for other uses. There could also be a positive impact on your home value. If that's something you're interested in learning more about, we would suggest you consult a realtor. These benefits are all very site specific, and every homeowner has to sort of think through how it might benefit them. You can go to the next slide. In certain cases, if you're on private well water as well as septic systems, obviously, if you connect your septic system to the public sewer, that reduces that chance of contamination from a drain field. As I mentioned, there's improvements to your local waterways by taking those discharges, and essentially they're going to be rerouted down to our treatment plants. And then there are costs there that are going to be avoided. So there are some costs associated with owning the septic system. Can you go to the next slide? And so here we're just showing some general costs for that would be avoided if you connected to the public sewer. So that's the pump out cost and a drain field replacement, which could be required over the life of the system. BAT, which is a best available technology, that's a nitrogen removal system. They cost a little bit more in terms of the operations and maintenance costs because they're a more complicated system than a traditional septic system. So we have an overall need that we want to try to improve and protect our waterways and improve the environment. We've developed a modification to the petition process, which we're going to talk about in more depth tonight. And we're going to talk more about how it's funded and how the petition process works. And our overall goal in this program is to connect 6,000 septic systems over the next 30 years, so about 200 systems a year. So the program history goes back a bit. We started with an initial concept planning effort, which was done in the mid, in that 2012 to 2016 range, where we were looking at the pollutant sector loads from the Maryland Department of Environment. We're looking at reducing our septic load by close to 50%. So we looked at, in our situation, trying to connect how we would connect up to 20,000 septic systems. After that, we convened a septic task force, which was which consisted of people from business groups and environmental groups and community groups. And we sort of talked through the challenges of a septic connection program. We looked really for guidance from the task force on policies, prioritization criteria. And what came out of that effort, and we're going to spend more time on tonight, were changes to the petition process to try to make it more affordable. So the two key changes we're going to discuss are subsidies. The county's now able to offer subsidies to projects in certain areas, and a partial deferment program, which is also available to locations in eligible areas. We've also developed an application process, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the program, when we talk about an eligible area in the program, that's really what's shown on this map. The green areas are areas in the county that are in the planned service area. The blue areas are the eligible areas for our program. So the key features for being an eligible area is that you're in the critical area, you're in a septic system problem area, or you're in an area that we've defined as an area that we think can be connected, or you're adjacent to one of those areas. So in this case, Poplar Point is eligible because it's in the critical area. So this was a potential area that we developed a while ago when we were looking at possible, as I mentioned, we were looking at one point of the possibility of connecting up to 20,000 septic systems. There is no project defined by DPW in the petition process. The project area is actually defined by the residents. We're just showing this area as a potential area to be served. But we do want to emphasize that the specific area gets really defined by the community. One thing about the petition and how it works with respect to a project area is the project area has to be contiguous from the point of connection along out to from the point of connection to the county system out to the end of the project area. So in this case, if the connection was along Poplar Point Road, if the line was along Poplar Point Road, both sides of Poplar Point Road would need to be in the project area, but not necessarily the side streets coming off of that road. So that's something to think about. If there's interest in this going forward, is how you would define your project area. In this case, the area, because it kind of slopes down to the water, we're looking at grinder pumps systems. We'll show a little bit of a picture of what that looks like later on. And it would go up towards our force main, which goes along Solomon's Island Road. So with that, we just wanted to pause see if there were any questions on the program and some of the background information. Okay.
I'm good. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to hand it off to Ed Shea with HDR. HDR is a consulting firm that's been helping us with different aspects of the program. He's going to talk a little bit more about the funding and the cost for a potential project.
Thank you, George. So this exhibit shows the different cost elements in this program. The county has developed this new program, which is a change from the previous petition process in an effort to reduce costs. And there are three basic elements to these costs. So the project cost is the first one. That's to construct the local sewers in the right of way. And that's shown here under the public side of this illustration. Typically that sewer would be in the street. The on-site costs are what we call the private costs. These are the costs of infrastructure on private property, abandoning the septic tank, new piping to connect to the sewer in the right of way. And the third element is the capital facility connection charge, the CFCC. And that represents the county's investment in the water reclamation facility capacity to treat your wastewater. And that's a fixed charge, typically increases on an annual basis. So then on the next slide, we're looking at this view a little bit more closely. Typically you'll have a septic tank maybe located anywhere on your property. A lot of times it's in the back of the house, drains into a drain field. And this would be abandoned. So that would involve pumping out the sewage that's in there now. This would be done by a private contractor that the homeowner would engage. Typically they're either a licensed disposal system contractor or a master plumber type of certification. And then the piping, in your case, Poplar Point would probably be served almost entirely by grinder pumps. So the grinder pump would be installed close to the home, close to the actual house, probably near your existing sewer that comes out of the house towards the septic tank. And then there would be piping from that grinder pump that would extend to the front of the house to connect to the sewer in the street. So there might be a clean out if you had a gravity sewer. But in the case of a grinder pump, there wouldn't be what's shown there, that vertical segment of pipe that typically is positioned right at the property line. That would not be there. But instead it would just go out into the street and connect to the main sewer. The estimated project cost. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I just wanted to ask, if you go back to that last slide, you said that one of the costs would be the abandon the septic system and you have to get it pumped out. Is that different than like your normal pump out that costs like $100 or $200? Or is it a different kind of service?
I think it would be very similar. You're essentially just removing the contents of the septic tank and having that hauled away. There might be some other procedures to comply with county code for properly abandoning the system, but yeah, you got the idea. It's along the lines of what you would expect from your typical regular maintenance pumping and hauling.
Okay, and so then the homeowner has to pay for the grinder pump and all the piping from the house to the street?
I'm going to ask George to comment on the cost of the grinder pump.
So the grinder pump cost would be included in the assessment, and we'll talk more about that. If you go, can you go back a couple slides. So the grinder pump would essentially be serving the same purpose as the sewer clean out on this diagram. So it's going to be the point near the edge of the public right of way that's going to connect to the public main in the street. And we would include the cost for the grinder pump in the assessment cost. What the homeowner would have to pay is all the costs from like the surrounding area around the house to get out to where the grinder pump is located. Let's see if we got a better diagram of that.
Do you want to, Rakia, do you want to show slide 48, please? '48 has the
grinder pumps on
image of the typical grinder pump system. Next one.
Yeah.
The one after this is shows the whole layout.
Yeah, there it is. So this was actually somewhat similar to what it would look like in your particular neighborhood. So each out in the front of each house, there would be a grinder pump, and there would be a smaller, what they call a small diameter force main, and then it would connect out to a line in the street. Now, in our case, there's actually a force main out on Route 2 there. So that part of this diagram isn't right, but it would roughly look, along those lines.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So going back to slide 23, we're talking about the average project cost per household. And the project costs we're talking about are the public sewer and the right of way. And as George mentioned, that would include the grinder pump. That portion of the cost, we would expect for this neighborhood, Poplar Point, based on a variety of factors that are listed there in the blue box. Proximity to the existing sewer system that your neighborhood sewer would need to connect to, how deep are the sewers, how many grinders. That puts Poplar Point about in the middle of the costs that we're seeing in this program. So about between $50,000 and $60,000 a year for the public sewer project component. Then as far as the private side costs, this chart is showing what the typical costs have been over the past 10 years or so for people who have connected. These are costs coming through the health department, not septic to sewer conversion projects, but people who are connecting to sewers that are already in front of their homes. And we're seeing those costs typically 4,000 to 6,000, maybe 6,000 to 8,000, depending on how the property is situated. So we would expect it to be less than 10,000. Homes in your neighborhood tend to be further back from the street, so that plays a factor. And so if a home is set back further from the street, there's more piping that has to be installed to connect to the public sewer. So that would drive it up as well. So when we say private side cost, this is what you could expect.
Ed, could you just go back one slide? So we just wanted to follow up. So this was 50 to 60,000 per household. Ed, I think you said per year. So it's not this was what we would think the public side cost would be for the construction. I just wanted to clear that up.
Yeah, so the label here is per EDU. We're talking about equivalent dwelling unit, or basically per home. So we'll pause there if you have any questions on the cost so far.
So So then if it's 50 or 60 cost per household for the project costs, and then it'd be 4 to 8 to connect to the street. So you're talking about from $54,000 to $68,000 for each homeowner to connect to sewage, basically.
Those are the elements of the cost. There's also the capital facility connection charge. Currently, that's about 8,000, I believe, 9,000. We're going to go into this in further detail in the next part of the slides.
Okay.
But these are the costs that roll up into the annual assessment. But yes, you've got the gist of it.
Okay. Thank you.
So the county's looking at different funding sources, and most importantly, with this new program, the county's been able to subsidize up to 25% of the project cost, what we're calling the total project cost for the public sewer component of it. There's also state funding through the Bay Restoration Fund, and that can be applied to the private side costs, as well as the CFCC. So the idea is that we can reduce or eliminate the upfront costs with the BRF grants. A portion of the BRF grant can also be applied to bring down the cost of the annual assessments, and we'll talk about that on the upcoming slides. The county's working with the state to look for ways to get additional grant funding, and also looking, always trying to use state revolving funds and other low interest loans to keep the assessment costs down. For the homeowner, the remaining costs are passed to the homeowner through the annual assessment. And we'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit more about these different features. The potential project subsidy was established in the legislation. So this is already set at 25%, up to 25% of the per property project cost. And that amount is available for households with income less than $300,000 a year. For over $300,000 a year, it's a half subsidy. So effectively 12.5% of the per property project cost. And the subsidy is used specifically to reduce the annual assessments. There's some other factors that are written into the code. The subsidies may be awarded based on the project ranking system, depending on the benefits of connecting your community. But generally, it's up to 25%. The BRF program, so this is the state program we mentioned, administered through MDE. This is assistance for the private on-site costs or the capital facility connection charge. Funding is available up to $20,000. So again, there are limitations in regard to household income, but for those under $300,000, up to $20,000. So typically $15,000 would be enough to cover a homeowner's upfront costs, the CFCC plus the on-site private cost to abandon the septic tank. The other $5,000 of that 20 is what we're trying to apply to reduce the assessment. And then, like I said, the county's working with MDE to try to increase this amount of Bay Restoration funds that could be available. But for right now, this is the assumption that we're using in presenting this cost information, is that it's limited to 20,000. So another way to look at this cost information here on the next slide, the construction costs are estimated from an engineering study. And those costs, the construction, will be added to all the related costs. The design effort, any easements that need to be acquired, inspections during construction of the project, other overhead type costs, all of that is rolled up into what we call the net assessable amount. And that would subtract from the project costs the subsidy that's available from the county, as well as the state's BRF grant. And the interest to finance that cost over a 40-year term is also included in that net assessable amount. And that is what turns into your annual assessment that would be paid in equal amounts over a 40-year period. So going back to the question earlier, that's why it's not simply adding up the costs, because once you finance it, you include the interest, and then it gets divided over the 40 years. So again, what I was explaining earlier, we're currently assuming 5,000 of that BRF grant, 5,000 of the 20,000 would be applied to lower the annual assessment. The other 15,000 is used to cover upfront costs, which could include the private on-site costs as well as the CFCC. For households up to 300,000, they can receive up to the 25% county subsidy. And then for households greater than 300,000, it's a half subsidy, 12.5%. Everyone has the option to defer up to 50% of the costs. And we're going to go into the deferment in a little bit more detail with an example in a few slides. So whatever the annual assessment amount is, you could choose to defer up to 50% of that amount payable at the end of the 40-year term or upon property transfer. For vacant lots, the homeowner does not get the option for the subsidy, the deferment, and no BRF funding. So what all this adds up to give you an idea of the range of costs that could be expected under these different options. For a home that accepts the subsidy and chooses not to defer, the annual cost per year would be between $1,500 and $2,500. If you take a 50% deferment, that drops it down to between $1,000 and $1,500. Now, these costs include the sewer usage fee that's billed on a quarterly basis. Right now, that's running about $35 a month for a typical household, so a little bit over $100 a quarter. That amount is included in this annual cost, just to give you an idea of the full sense of what your new cost would be. So that's why that third bar that's blue in the middle is around $420, because 100% of the assessment is being deferred in this case, and the only obligation of the homeowner is to pay that quarterly sewer usage bill. And then the bars on the right show the increased cost ranges for households with higher income, over 300,000. So just a summary of what these assessment options are. For the private side costs, the homeowner can access the Bay Restoration Funds grants, and those are available at connection right away. The capital facility charge also can use the Bay Restoration Fund grants, or the homeowner can choose to finance the CFCC over 40 years. And then the annual assessment is also financed over 40 years. Homeowner has an option to defer up to 50%. And this is paid in a separate bill. It's separate from your tax bill. It's separate from the sewer usage bill. Every January, a homeowner would receive a separate assessment bill for the sewer connection. I'm going to turn it over to Ron Briggerman, who's going to walk through a couple of examples on how the deferred payment option works.
Before we go to that next section, I do want to address this question here in the chat. And the question is, how are the grinder pumps powered?
So the grinder pumps are powered by electricity. So there's a control panel that often it can be installed near the house, or sort of, on the house. The grinder pump itself needs to be near the roadway, so that if if say the house is really far from the road, we would have a control panel installed near the grinder pump. The main thing, it needs to be visible and accessible from operations personnel so they can be sure it's not powered when somebody's going to work on it. And the homeowner does have to pay those extra electrical costs associated with the grinder pump.
Okay. My name's Ron Briggerman. I work in the Department of Public Works. Wanted to go over some of the options here with you. And talking about all the costs that Ed and George have discussed, a partial deferment option is available where you're going to delay a portion of the amount of the assessment. The assessment in the example given for the 40-year total assessment was $60,000, in that range. That's purely an estimate. But this type of deferral, the up to 50%, is available to all residential homeowners in the project area. And the total deferred portion becomes payable at the time of deed transfer or 40 years, whichever occurs first. And then once if it is paid at transfer, then the remaining portion of the 40 years would be paid by the next property owner. But if we look at the 40 years and talking about paying $60,000 over 40 years, without a deferral, that would be $1,500 per year. And 50% deferral would be $30,000, half of that $60,000. The $30,000 gets set aside, and you would pay, instead of paying $1,500 a year, you would only pay $750 a year. The 50% reduction there. So regardless of when you would sell your house or your house is transferred, you would owe $30,000. In a minute, I'll talk about the other type of deferral, and then I'll go over a comparison to let you see how the two actually work. So at the time of transfer, $30,000 would be due. You would have been paying $750 per year during the period of deferral. Next owner is that $750 as well. If you could go to the next slide. So then on the full deferral, this is a little bit different because this is only available to qualifying owners. It's for folks that are defined as being elderly, which is 60 years and above. And also, and you have to have a limited income, and there's guidelines that dictate how much income can be there for your household. And then there's also for the folks that are disabled, and there's definitions of disability that apply here as well. But in this case, that $60,000 assessment over 40 years, 100% of that is set aside at $1,500 per year. So each year, $1,500 gets set aside and deferred to a later time. So the yearly assessment for the current owner is zero because everything is set aside. Then we look at the total due on transfer. So it's $1,500 per year that's set aside. So the example is, if you sell after 10 years, you would owe 10 times that $1,500 or $15,000. And then the continuing assessment for the next owner is $1,500 per year. It goes on after that. If you can go to the next slide, we'll talk about the comparison. And on the deferment payback comparison, again, 40 years, $60,000 assessment. We talk about no deferral would be $1,500 per year. The chart to the right talks about payback required at property transfer. If you sold your house after 5 years, under the 100% deferral, you would owe 5 times $1,500 or $7,500. With the septic, the 50% septic connection deferment, so up to 50, but this example uses 50, you would owe $30,000 at the end of 5 years, and you would have been paying $750 each of those years as well. That same thing applies at 10 years. So 10 times 1,500 for the 100% deferral is 15,000. Again, after 10 years, you're still going to pay that same 30,000, and you would have been paying $750 a year as you go forward. The chart continues the pattern at 15 years and 20 years. One key thing, as you see, is each number in the column under 100% is the amount of years you were there times the $1,500. On the other side, under the 50%, you're paying $30,000, whether you sell your home at 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, it's all going to be 30,000. Under the first one, you would have been paying 0 all along. Under the 50%, you would have been paying $750. So something that's, very beneficial if you look at it in terms of deferring payment or delaying the amount that you have to pay. But then that comes back to, what you have to pay at different periods when your house is transferred, or if it goes the full 40-year term, what would have been paid and due at those time periods. So now we'll go on to the next process unless there are questions.
Okay, thanks, Ron. I'll pick it up from here.
All right, George.
So since we've been talking to a lot of different communities this year, because the program's new and we want to just inform people. So, since it's not feasible really to offer a subsidy to every potential community, we developed this application process. So we're going to talk just briefly here about the application process and the petition process, because ultimately this is a petition, this work will be done as a petition project. So the very beginning of the process is sort of where we are now, the beginning of the beginning. We received some interest in the program. So we're coming out to do, well, we're doing virtually, we're doing the presentation tonight. The next step is if there's some interest in the community, we have an application that we would want sent in. We'll go over the details. It's not very rigorous. And that's just to help us put a name and a project area, potential project area together. We would do a little more investigation and come back to the community with a second meeting. So we'd refine some of these costs a little bit. And at that point, then none of these steps are non-binding at all. After we do the second meeting, the next step would be for the community to decide whether they want to enter the more formal petition process. And in that part, you'd be asking your neighbors to sign a form saying they're interested or not interested in petitioning. Once a formal petition is submitted, it comes over to our group in utility design, and we would do an engineering study, a more detailed engineering study. At the end of that, we'd have a public hearing, and then Ron's group would prepare an assessment ballot, and the community would vote on whether to proceed with the project. So a couple key things on the ballot is that the projects move forward if it's a simple majority. So 50% plus one vote is enough to move the projects forward. So it's important to communicate within your neighborhood about how everybody is feeling about it. And because if the project moves forward, then everybody is required to connect. So the 51% can make, the 49% connect. A second thing is when the ballot goes out, if you don't return the ballot, it's counted as a no vote. So you have to affirmatively, say that you support the project for it to go forward. If it goes forward, DPW does the final designs and costs, and then we construct the system, and then the community has to connect within 9 months of the system being completed. So if we go to the next, this is a little more detail on the petition process. So overall, what's happening in the petition process is the residents are requesting Public Works to extend the utility to their location. So there's also a water petition process. We haven't talked about that tonight because the new program changes are only oriented towards sewer connections. But the petition process itself is the same. The community files the petition. Public Works does a preliminary engineering report or a schematic design report. There's a public hearing. We send out the assessment ballot, and at that point, we would be basing that on our expected total project cost plus the financing at that point in the design, which is about the 30% completion stage. If the ballots come back with 50%, that 50% plus one approval, the project moves forward. And if you go to the next slide, we will then finalize the design, advertise for construction, hire a contractor who will come out and do the construction work. After the work is completed, all the residents will get a letter saying the job is complete. And at that point, you have 9 months to connect. If you've recently installed a septic system or a nitrogen removal unit, you can get an extension on the connection time, but you would still, so you might not have to connect within 9 months, but you would still get the annual assessment. And then overall, the assessments begin the next calendar year after the project is completed, because the assessments are based on all the final project costs. So once all the work is done and the county's finished paying the contractor and the designers and everybody, then we can finalize the project costs. Go to the next slide. So I don't know if there's any questions on that. Sometimes neighborhoods have been through the petition process and sometimes they haven't. So, you know, if there's any questions about the application or the petition process, we'll talk a little bit more about the applications in a second. So, okay. So we've set up a community page on the Our Water website, and this has been set up to help in terms of providing information to other people who maybe couldn't make it tonight. So if you go to the Our Water webpage, and you can go, first of all, the easiest way to get to the community webpage is to use the bit link that's right there. But if you go to the Our Water webpage and you go to the septic to sewer portion, you type in your address, it should pop up that you're in an eligible area, and then there'll be a box that says go to your community webpage. So what we're putting on there is the slides will be there from tonight's presentation. Within a week or so, we'll have a recording of tonight's meeting will be on there. And we'll post some other information that's related to the program. One thing as well, there's a box, a comment box on the web page, and you can let us know if you think you're interested, if you think you're not interested, or if you have any comments on the presentation and the information. This is a nice way for us to be able to kind of get a feeling for whether you know, there seems to be a lot of interest in the area. So you can go to the next slide. So if there is some interest, then the next step would be for the community or the neighborhood to turn in an application. So the application isn't very detailed. It's just a community name. We would need a primary contact person, someone that we could coordinate with in the future. There's a project area map, and we would work with the contact person to figure out the map boundaries. And one thing I mentioned on earlier is that the area has to be continuous from where it connects to the county system outward. But in this particular case, like some of the side streets off of Poplar Point Road, wouldn't necessarily have to be in a project area. And at the same point, some of the properties at the far end of the road might not have to be in there because you could end the line, at some point along Poplar Point Road. What we can't do is skip over a property. So everybody along the alignment has to be in, but there's some flexibility in deciding whether to go up a side street or whether to go all the way down the street instead of 3/4 of the way down the street. And then for the other thing that we're looking for with an application is some initial show of community support. So this could be an online poll of property owners. We could also look at if people go onto that community webpage and tell us they're interested or not interested. We can kind of look at that to get an idea of whether there's an interest. And the main thing we're really looking for here is not so that we don't have just a handful of people that might be interested in a much larger area, sort of driving, everything. So, but it doesn't need to be 50% because the application's not binding. It's just a way for us to sort of identify some communities so that when we rank them, we have an idea of the size of the area that we're talking about. So if you go to the next slide, this talks a little bit about the ranking process. So since we can't offer a subsidy to every area every time, we develop this ranking process, and you can see the key factors. That's what we're showing here. So how many pounds of nitrogen are removed, how many properties are in the critical area, how many properties are, if it's an on-site wastewater management problem area. I don't think these areas are, but they're definitely in the critical area. And then there's some cost metrics that we look at, the dollar per pound nitrogen removed, the distance from the county's infrastructure. We ideally want to grow, from our existing system and out. So if you're closer to our existing system, your project's going to score a little bit higher. So we'll use these to rank potential projects, and then that's how we'll decide, to offer the subsidy. But there will be different application cycles. So if an area doesn't get a subsidy one year, it doesn't mean that we might not come back in a different year and offer that. So you can go to the next slide.
George?
Yes.
Hi, quick question. The county subsidy of 25 or 12.5%. So if we ranked below another neighborhood, we might get a lower percentage subsidy, or we might not get the subsidy.
You would not get the subsidy.
Okay.
And we would tell you that. We would when we came back for our follow-up, we would tell you that. And then, okay. But you could say resubmit the next application year. And then, because we don't know who's going to submit an application in a given year, and then hopefully we connect some communities, and then we can kind of move down, to other communities. And I think there was a question about who pays for the maintenance on the grinder pumps. So the county maintains the grinder pumps, and that's actually why they need to be out in front of the property, so they're accessible to county staff. I think, Ricky, can you go to the slide? There's the one slide on the grinder pumps that I don't think we showed yet. It has the cross section of what it looks like. So these are two diagrams from our county standards. So that on the top, it's really showing you what the grinder pump looks like. Most of it is below ground. There'll be there's like a little green dome usually that sticks up over, out of the ground. And then, as I mentioned, there's a control panel nearby. So, but that'll be in the front of the property, and you can see on the lower one is little more schematic of a drawing, but there's a, there'll be, the pump will be near the edge of the right of way, and then there'll be a line going back into the, back to the residence, and then there's a line going out to the main line that would be in the street. We do need an easement, that's an area around the pump, so that when it needs to be serviced, the county personnel has a right to be in that area on your property. So that's part of the grinder pump installation, is a small easement. And that area does need to be clear of obstructions.
Anyone have any other questions?
Okay. Well, we appreciate everyone joining us tonight. You can always leave any additional questions or comments through the webpage. And I guess we can ask the team to stay on for a few more minutes, but thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. All right, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Yeah,
night.
have a good night. See ya.
Good night.